So with the help of Associated Press and the words of some of the firefighters themselves, some images, some graphic, some disturbing, but important now.
Chaplain Michael Judge, the New York City Fire Department chaplain, who was administering last rites to one of his own, another firefighter, when debris fell on him.
Almost every morning he would say a special prayer for peace in the city and for safety for all the visitors, because he just thought this was the greatest place in the world.
He would say to me once in a while, "You know what I really need?" "No, what, Mike?" "Absolutely nothing. I don't need a thing in the world. I am the happiest man on the face of the earth."
It was terror, sheer terror. Bodies were falling out of the sky.
Do you ever think of maybe not being a fireman anymore?
No, Mr. King, I will always be a fireman here in New York City.
In terms of the people we're looking for, it's a couple of hundred firefighters and police officers, which is a staggering number. The men and women who are doing this, when you see them doing it, they are literally putting their lives at risk to try to find people and save them.
Personally, I've lost quite a few, maybe a dozen personal friends, and it breaks my heart. They're great men, they're very great men.
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for making the nation proud. And may God bless America.
This recovery operation is an exceedingly dangerous operation, and the men and women who are involved in it are very brave people and entitled to, the admiration and respect of all of us.
Do you ever think of maybe not being a fireman anymore?
No, Mr. King, I will always be a fireman here in New York City, protecting the people of New York and my friends.
Our colleague Peter Viles put that together with the help of the staff photographers of Associated Press. There's extraordinary power in a still photo, and if you ever doubted that, I can't imagine you do anymore, nor can I imagine that anyone in this city will ever look at New York's bravest the same again, or at least for a while. Let's update you on where we are right at this hour. Here are the latest developments in this American tragedy. In the past hour, the FBI has arrested a second material witness. He was arrested here in New York. The FBI says that man was one of 25 people detained by the INS on immigration holds. And from the Pentagon tonight, a call to arms. The Pentagon formally ordered 35,000 reservists to active duty to help with homeland defense. That's what it's called, in an operation called Noble Eagle. President Bush also warned the American public that the United States is, in his words, at war. In that address, he called on the fighting men and women to be prepared for battle and warned that the country faces a hidden enemy on a battlefield without borders. In New York, the search for survivors goes on as fire and rescue personnel work through a smoldering mound of debris and rubble. 152 bodies have now been found, and the number of missing climbs to more than 4,900 people, suggesting the death toll will exceed 5,000. It's certainly possible. It was a mournful day, as we have been saying here in New York City, as the city began burying its dead. Among them, fire chaplain Michael Judge, buried today in a very moving service. He was one of 3 fire officials laid to rest. Hundreds of firefighters presumably dead, many still missing in the rubble behind us. On to what is next. Joseph Bodansky is an expert. He's an author and an expert on Osama bin Laden. Who is this guy? Why is this guy? And perhaps above all, why is he so hard to get? He joins us tonight. Good evening.
Good evening.
Let me start with the last of those questions. This is a name, Bin Laden, that's been tossed around this country as not quite public enemy number one, but that sort of thing for any number of years. How has he remained at large? Why is he so difficult to get?
He's sitting in Afghanistan. He's moving between 5 or 6 bunkers that, by the way, we paid for during the Great Jihad of the 1980s. He's moving constantly between them. He's running a lot of security operations around him. He's running a lot of decoys. He's shielded and protected by the Taliban because he's family. And unless somebody just walks all the way to him, it's impossible to reach to him. And his bodyguards, including his son, have a standing order to shoot him to make sure that nobody captures him alive.
Why does he hate the United States so?
For 2 reasons in principle. The first is a more ideological one, which is he believes that the Muslim world could have surged and become a leading superpower in the aftermath of the collapse of communism, that Islam could have become the leading political ideology of the world, and that westernization, the penetration of the West, the overwhelming influence of the West, of globalization, etc., prevents it from happening. And then there's a more personal, if you want, reason, and it is personally hurt by what he called the defiling of the sacred land of Arabia, that is the presence of our forces there, starting with the Gulf War and till this very day.
I don't know if this is true, so I'll just ask you. Someone told me today that during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the United States, in fact, gave financial support to Bin Laden or Bin Laden's people. Is that true?
No, we provided support to Pakistani intelligence that disseminated it as they saw fit with whatever guidance from here. Bin Laden people, quote unquote, were part of the group, the central group, the Pakistani intelligence controlled and supported. Their objective was to ensure the Islamist, with an IST, character of the resistance rather than permit the various tribal and localized commanders to rise up. That was the strategy. It was self-defeating for the West, and we're still paying the price for it because from that leadership there emerged the Islamist terrorist movement that we're now confronting.
You started following this guy 20 years ago, if I remember this correctly. What was it 20 years ago that got you interested in him?
In Bin Laden?
Yeah.
I mean, Osama Bin Laden. Well, I had a meeting in London with a friend, was one of the Arab volunteers in Afghanistan, a gentleman that was much older than the usual and very articulate individual, and we were talking about all sorts of things, and he brought up Bin Laden's name and he said this is a guy to follow, that if he's not martyred anytime soon, he'll make history. So I was really captivated, and he hasn't disappointed me. He is a formidable individual, a very lucid, a very articulate individual. That it's fascinating to study his writing, his ideas, his ideology, even though he's vehemently, virulently anti-American. Nonetheless, his intellect is immense.
Is he a smart guy, charismatic guy? Is he someone who uses his charisma to attract followers, or does he use his wallet to attract followers?
No, first of all, Bin Laden does not have a penny to his soul. Let's make it clear, despite all of the myths. Now, as far as him, he uses his charisma, his eyes, to reach to the people, to attract their attention, to build trust, but then he convinces them. His argumentation is exceptionally lucid. His pronunciation of the Quran is the citation from luminaries of Islamic past, etc., are excellent. He makes excellent case. He's very articulate. His language is flowery. His poetry is great. He just wins you over and he convinces you.
And just a quick final question, if I can. Do you think the United States ultimately will get him, or will he get away again?
Or he considers himself dead. He considered himself a martyr, having martyred de facto already in the early 1980s, and every day that he lives is kind of a blessing. And I think that he will rather be martyred than be caught alive, and as I said, the people around him will make sure that he is martyred rather than be captured by us.
Mr. Bdansky, nice to talk to you. Appreciate it. I hope we'll talk again. Thank you very much for my pleasure. Thank you for joining us. If we can go to the rescue site for a second, I think there's a picture worth showing you at this point. I'm going to look at the monitor. Down there, and you guys are going to have to try and zoom in a little bit if you can. It's a little shaky. We believe they are pulling out a fire truck that had been buried in the rubble or under the rubble. Do we see it? It's just, I think we may have zoomed past it there. Maybe we can steady the shot and try it again. Again, if you recall the sequence of events, the first plane hit at 8:48, and fire crews, of course, immediately raced to the scene. And then the second tower was hit, and more trucks came. And all of this went on before the collapse. And then when the collapse came, the trucks, and tragically, too, many of the firefighters were buried. And they're starting to find at least the trucks tonight. All around the city, we have noticed in our day-to-day American flags everywhere. I think that's true around the country. It's certainly true here. And it's not just middle-aged people. It's not just older veterans of World War II. Kids even have been struck with a sense of patriotism, perhaps different, maybe even in some ways for the first time in their lives. CNN's Jason Bellini tonight on that.
For a generation accustomed to fleeting fashion statements, for the moment, it's hip to be wearing the flag.
We drove in and we were saying we've never even done this on the 4th of July, like get dressed up.
Young people are flocking to nightly vigils around New York City, expressing a mix of emotions, including one that many from the X and Y generations have never felt before: patriotism, pride in being American, pride in their government.
I know in my particular case I've had a lot of issues with the U.S. government in the past. I mean, I'm gay, and they don't do a very good job, I think, of, supporting and including their gay citizens. And this is the first time I've really been able to look at the government in an, important situation and say they're doing a great job, and I'm glad to have them.
Older Americans have long wondered, do these kids have it in them? The love of country, the willingness to sacrifice. Having grown up in safe and privileged times, the under 30 crowd admits they've never been tested.
As a generation, we don't really have anything that brings us together because there hasn't been one world event that would do it for us.
Older Americans also have wondered whether their MTV generation compatriots know how to be serious, to not be cynical. Do young people care about anything other than that which directly affects them? MTV apparently thinks so. It switched to network news coverage the day of the disaster.
This is really unprecedented television.
TRL, the popular video countdown program with host Carson Daly, for the first time in its history, played not a single video.
Let's celebrate the gift of life.
You hear a lot of kids, all like, oh, the government sucks and blah, blah. But right now, I'm very proud to be, a voting member of our United States government.
Will the ADD generation lose interest quickly? MTV News reporter John Norris thinks not.
The idea of sacrifice, the idea of a threatening world it's foreign to them. And I'm afraid that this week may be on the brink of a real fundamental change in the kind of world we live in.
I pretty much like the ways of America and people around here and just America itself. Today, there was no reason not to be proud of the whole thing because of how people reacted to it,
For the younger generation, patriotism stoked not necessarily by tragedy itself, but by the way Americans react when the time comes. Jason Bellini, CNN, New York.
Patriotism, old-fashioned patriotism, was on our colleague Jeff Greenfield's mind tonight when he sat down with his guests. Here's the conversation.
It's become commonplace to say that the America we woke up to Wednesday morning was fundamentally different from the America we woke up to Tuesday morning. One of the clearest ways it has changed is that there are going to be burdens imposed on us and demands asked of us that we never could have imagined when this week started. And you're already beginning to hear the question, are we, as a people, and particularly the younger generation, are we up to it? Joining me to look at this question and others are Senator John McCain, Republican of Arizona. He joins us from Phoenix. Senator McCain's father was a commander of the fleet during the Vietnam War. His grandfather was a legendary carrier commander during World War II. These are stories told by Senator McCain in a remarkable book, Faith of My Fathers. Also with us from Washington, Richard Reeves. He's a journalist, a historian, prize-winning author of, among other things, a book about the Kennedy administration. His latest book, Richard Nixon, Alone in the White House, will be published this fall. And we expect to be joined in a few moments by Andre Cherney, at 26, a veteran of the White House. He served as a chief speechwriter and advisor to ex-Vice President Al Gore. As soon as Mr. Cherney is ready, we will bring him into the conversation. But Senator McCain, let me begin with you. The men that your grandfather led and your father served with have been immortalized as the greatest generation in film, Saving Private Ryan, on television, Band of Brothers. And there's an implication here, I think, that this generation had something that later generations, particularly baby boomers and so-called Generation Y, may lack. Do you buy into that idea?
I think they may have lacked it because I don't think there was the threat. Now I am of the conviction that with this tragedy and active war that's been committed against us, when in some respects is significantly more damaging than Pearl Harbor was, that I believe Americans will respond. In my failed presidential campaign, I saw that young Americans were prepared not only to serve their neighborhood, their communities, and their country, but they were eager to, and they are eager to. And I think you're going to see young Americans galvanized with a sense of duty and purpose that will equal that of the greatest generation.
One of the challenges, though, I think, and I want to pick up on that comment in a few minutes, is that the people who fought in World War II had known hard times even before the war. They'd gone through a depression already that lasted more than 10 years. Asking them to give up something in some ironic way may have been less of a challenge than to a generation that has known nothing but peace and prosperity. Does that not make it a little harder, through no fault of later generations?
Well, I think you could turn that coin on the other side, and that is that we have so much, that there's so much at risk now that which perhaps was not at risk for the greatest generation. So therefore, the urgency of this mission may be even more than it was. I mean, we were worried deeply about the threat of Nazi Germany and Japan. But I think that deep down, at least amongst our leaders, we knew that we were going to prevail because we had the military and industrial might to do so. I think that there's this threat now that could really change the way we live in a permanent fashion unless we do something about it. And finally, one additional comment. Franklin Delano Roosevelt led this nation. He led this nation and he inspired this nation. We have to have inspired leadership. That has always been a key element in moments of crisis. And I believe that this president is rallying the American people and getting their full and wholehearted support.
Let me turn to Andre Cherney, who does join us. He's with us from Los Angeles, the former speechwriter to Vice President Gore. You with us now, Mr. Cherney? There you are.
Yeah, good to see you,
okay.
Jeff.
You heard what Senator McCain had said, and let me put the concern to you in its most impolite terms, okay? Your generation goes ballistic when it can't download music into its Palm Pilot. It expects everything at its fingertips instantly, if not sooner. And it has not had any reason to have had anything expected of it. And so I'll put to you the question I put to Senator McCain. Are you confident that this generation, that would, again, through no necessarily fault of your own, has had it as easy as anyone up till now, that this is going to be a tough call?
You know, I am very confident, not actually in spite of what you say, but in many ways because of it. You're right, we're a generation that can't watch TV without remote control. We can't imagine not having a pizza at our front door 30 minutes after we order it. We get impatient when it takes more than a few seconds for a web page to download. We expect a package sent from one side of the country to arrive at another at 10 a.m. the next morning. And yet at the same time, we're a generation that is already setting records in terms of community service, in terms of reading tutoring. That's much more likely, 50% more likely to help an elderly neighbor than even young people 15, 20 years ago. We're a generation with a huge amount of civic responsibility. We've stayed away from the political sphere because we see a politics that's fundamentally broken. But at the same time, we've been involved in our communities. We have a huge reservoir of idealism and energy and action. And as Senator McCain pointed out so eloquently before, we have in some ways been waiting for the chance to channel that. Now, whether we like it or not, and we certainly don't like it, now is our not only chance but our responsibility to step up to the plate in the same way the previous generations in the course of American history have.
Andre, many of the people you describe, who I've talked to and others have talked to, who volunteer their time in local projects, as you made the point, they don't connect with national politics because either they think it has nothing to do with them, as you say, it's broken, or it doesn't have any resonance. Could this dreadful act wipe that disconnection out or reconnect your generation to a national cause because of its enormity?
I believe it will by pure necessity. You can no longer think what many people said maybe a year ago, that what happens in the Middle East or what happens in other parts of the world doesn't have any connection to us. We know now that what we should have known all along, that the world's a very small place, and what happens in one nation affects another, what happens in one community affects another, what happens in one neighborhood affects another. The very challenges that are being put to my generation and to young people are the same challenges as you know, Jeff, that were put to the generation that did become the greatest generation. Yes, they lived through the Great Depression, but at the same time, they were the generation that was born and raised in the 1920s, during the Roaring '20s, the age of flappers and a go-go stock market. And yet, when the time came, those same young people were the ones who stormed the beaches at Normandy. And what once was the lost generation became the greatest generation. And I think that that's really been the lesson of American history. That in every moment of crisis, a generation that has had the responsibility to step up to the plate has done that and has really made this country what it is today.
Richard Reeves, let me put one more possible concern on the table, and it's one you know quite well. You've covered politics and public policy for more than 30 years. We've watched each other grow older together in these respective fields. You have seen and chronicled a steady rise, not simply of skepticism, but of cynicism about public life. We've been taught by everyone from the press to late-night comedians to scoff at anything that our leaders say. Can that be turned around now that we are in something approaching wartime, if not wartime itself?
I think it can be turned around, but it's up to the leaders. I agree that the problem is not in the character of the American people. This all began for me out in Sag Harbor, which is a town of 2,000 people, and within an hour of the first strike, there were flags on every house in the village, and those flags weren't at half-mast, they were high. People want to fight, and I suspect that young people want to have some role to play that's more important in terms of the world and of history than they have so far, and we don't need the kind of numbers that we needed in World War II. No, but we need smaller numbers of higher educated people, and the problem then, I think the will is there right at the moment. It depends on where the leadership of the country takes them, particularly the president, and the decisions are made. We're going to attack somebody. We're going to bomb someplace. There's no question about that. The question is, where are we going to do it and why? And there'll be plenty of people to do it, willing, happy to do it.
The question I'm raising, Richard, and then I want to hear what Senator McCain has to say, because he's already mentioned this point, that it's not simply that Americans want to support their people, their fallen, their country. It's that don't they have to believe that leaders are to be followed, leaders are to be trusted. And you've had 30 years or more of a message, partly the political system's fault, that says, to quote Mr. Bob Dylan, don't follow leaders. Can people raised with that kind of cynicism say, okay, now I believe what you're telling me?
Well, President Giuliani did fine for the first couple of days while we tried to find the other one. Yes, I don't think the cynicism is that deep, because it was more ennui than cynicism. They had no reason to care about things. I think the cynicism may come further down the road, and Bush's great opportunity and obligation is to educate the American people as to what's happening and to truly, not just to bomb Iraq and bomb Afghanistan, but what is the role of people like Saudi Arabia, of Pakistan, of Egypt in this? If we go and attack the old enemies, then there will be great cynicism in the country, because sooner or later it will become apparent that it wasn't these people who attacked the United States. It was a much bigger operation, well-financed, probably from places like Saudi Arabia, which has been exporting its fundamentalism to protect the royal family for all this time, exporting it first to Afghanistan with Pakistan's help and with our help, and now they've exported their fundamentalist problem to the United States.
Senator McCain, this raises, I think, a point that we sometimes overlook, I guess, historically, that there are times that when a war is prosecuted, and there's always early support, and it drags on, it stalemates, we get bogged down, we're waist deep in the big muddy, support begins to ebb. It happened in Korea, it certainly happened in Vietnam. So is Richard Rees right in pointing out that if this, whatever we do is not executed with precision and intelligence and real consistency, that risks returning the country to a more cynical or divided state?
I think there's that risk, and that's why I believe the President of the United States has and is and must say to the American people, this is a long twilight struggle. This is going to take time and patience. I guess tomorrow we could launch a bunch of cruise missiles and everybody might feel good for a few days, but we all know that that's not a very effective, in fact, singularly ineffective method of responding to these kinds of situations. So we've got to have patience. I think the other thing I think here domestically we really have to be concerned about it, and that is some kind of rise of anti-Middle Eastern sentiment. Here in Arizona today, in Phoenix, there was a couple of drive-by shootings of people who appear to be Middle Eastern. The President and all of us have to tell people, look, we're different. And the reason why we're different is because we embrace and we love all of our citizens, and for us to somehow engage in this activity is really a terrible thing, and we've got to guard against that right now.
One thing that Richard Rees alluded to, one of the rare moments of humor we've had, is the reference to President Giuliani. You referred to leadership. It's striking, isn't it, how what Mayor Giuliani has done in the last 4 days. Can you put your finger on it? Is it possible to describe it in a sentence? Because it certainly is evident.
Visibility, relate to the people of New York City. The people of New York City know Rudy Giuliani, and they know he may have some warts, but they know that he's a very efficient and capable guy. I happen to think he's a wonderful leader. I'm wondering if they're going to repeal the term limits that keeps him from running again.
Well, you anticipated a question about whether the Congress would have a sense of the Congress resolution to do just that. You guys came for
Governor Pataki has done well. Both New York senators, Senator Schumer and Senator Clinton, have done well. I think New Yorkers can be very proud. You know, we look at New Yorkers as the most cynical people in the world, and yet we've seen displays of heroism that are writing chapters in American history.
Mr. Cherney, I have a son who's not that much younger than you, which attests to the early start of your career. And I must say, as a father, one of the things that hit me in the first hours of this is that my son's life, for at least the foreseeable future, may well be radically different from the life that he or I or anyone would have imagined of his generation. Personally, you're just starting out your own career. Are you feeling that you woke up, or by Tuesday at noon, you saw your life taking a route that you and your generational friends could never, in your wildest nightmare, have imagined? Has it hit you?
It certainly has. You know, I wrote a book earlier this year called The Next Deal, about really where America needs to go and where my generation needs to go. And a lot of what I said there is still true, but it's a very different America, I think, than the America I was foreseeing that my generation would live in. We really never have asked, as no generation has asked, for really a life of comfort and ease. But what the world that's been handed to us and the world as it's changed after September 11th is a world really where we're going to be called forth to do what previous generations in times of challenge and crisis have had to do. You know, the heroes that John McCain just described, the people firefighters and emergency medical professionals and police officers who rushed into the building as everybody else was rushing out, those were people in their 20s and 30s. They were from this young generation. They're the ones who risked their lives, who lost their lives by the hundreds, perhaps the thousands. They're the ones who are really representing what I think this generation is made of. I think we nobody looks for this type of responsibility placed on their shoulders, but I think it's the responsibility of my generation, as it is the responsibility of those older than us, to lead and to do their part to really make sure that our mark on history is as great as that other generations have left in previous.